Right now, there aren't a lot of good representation of big two comic superheroes, DC and Marvel, in television and streaming. The MCU on Disney Plus is pretty much a bust. I don't think there's really been anything outstanding. Been a couple of things that are kind of good here and there, but for the most part, really bad stuff. And the Arrowverse on CW hasn't been all that good for a few years, other than Superman and Lois, which I personally think is absolutely fantastic. Probably the best representation live action since the Christopher Reeve movies all the way back in like the 70s and 80s. That's how good I think Tyler Hoechlin's version of Superman in Superman and Lois is. And I need to be worried. You need to be worried. If you're a fan of Superman and Lois, it looks like everything is conspiring to get this show, this wonderful adaptation of Superman, canceled in the not too distant future. Superman and Lois was picked up for a third season on the CW, but since that's happened, a lot of things have changed. Obviously, we've had the Warner Brothers Discovery merger. We now know that James Gunn and Peter Safran are taking over as the heads of DC Studios, which will include DC television products. We've also had the CW, which was co-owned by Warner Brothers, sold off to Nexstar, and they're kind of cleaning house. We've also had the big announcement from Henry Cavill that he's coming back as the live action version of Superman, at least on the big screen, and it looks like all these things are creating a perfect storm that is going to lead to the demise of the best adaptation of Superman that we've had in like 30 or 40 years at this point. By now, I'm sure most of you have heard the news regarding DC Studios, as well as the Nexstar acquisition of CW. Let's talk about some of the details that are likely leading to the demise of one of my favorite shows, Superman and Lois. The last remaining OG Arrowverse show, The Flash, ends on the CW with its 9th season. The series will put out 13 episodes for its final run. The Flash was among 3 shows that formed the basis for what would become the Arrowverse, alongside Arrow and Supergirl. The former aired its final season in 2020, while Supergirl hung up its cape last year. Other Arrowverse shows like Batgirl, Naomi, Legends of Tomorrow, and Black Lightning were also canceled recently. At one point, the Arrowverse was the backbone, the foundation of what CW was putting out, at least as far as original programming. The CW has traditionally tailored their shows for like a younger audience, like 15 to 20 years old. But in reality, the average age of a CW viewer is actually more like 58 or something, because a lot of people like the characters specifically in the CW, and even Archie. Obviously, you had Riverdale as well. So you had an older skewing audience looking for nostalgia, things that they liked when they were younger. The Arrowverse, Flash, Green Arrow, characters like that you could only see on the CW. I think that was one of the smart things that they did. A lot of the characters, excluding the Flash himself, that you would see in the Arrowverse, you wouldn't really actually see in the DCEU itself. So you had an older audience looking for nostalgia while they were catering the shows themselves to like a younger skewing audience. I think it made the shows kind of schizophrenic. The people watched them for the most part, but they never really liked them because after a season or two, they would just completely devolve into like this teen angst drama shows rather than superhero shows. So typically a CW Arrowverse show after 2 seasons really wouldn't be worth watching. The only exception really is Smallville, which wasn't part of the Arrowverse. That was actually pretty good for about 5 seasons. It felt like Superman and Lois was going to be the exception to the rule. The show that probably had some staying power because it felt like the creators behind it really had a good idea of what they wanted their Superman to be, and really they cast a perfect actor for it. When you look at Tyler Hoechlin, I'm like, that guy doesn't really look like Superman, but when you see him portray the character, he is Clark Kent. He really personifies the character. So it's really sad that pretty much the entire Arrowverse outside of Superman and Lois and then Stargirl has pretty much been canceled at this point. But then we got the news on Stargirl. DC Stargirl concludes with its 3rd season, which is currently airing on the CW. The cancellation of DC Stargirl comes less than a month after Nexstar Media Group completed its acquisition of the network and is the latest series coming to an end. Nexstar executives signaled its focus will be on retooling the CW and shifting toward unscripted content and shows that appeal to an older audience. As I mentioned earlier, actually the shows on the CW for the most part did appeal to an older audience. They just didn't make it for them, which I thought was really strange. Sounds like they're probably going to be going to more reality-based television. That's a lot cheaper to produce than scripted television. And apparently, Superman and Lois is the cheese. It stands alone. Everything else in the CW Arrowverse has been canceled at this point, except for Superman and Lois, which has been greenlit for a 3rd season, and I do expect to see that. Although we won't get to see Jonathan Kent. Apparently that character has been recast. Outside of Tyler Hoechlin as Superman and the actress portraying Lois, I believe the portrayal of Jonathan Kent is especially strong, and it's probably the best character in there outside of Clark Kent, so that's going to be a huge loss. Perhaps it's best that it ends up getting canceled prematurely before it goes bad like everything else on the CW. But there are a few more things happening around this that kind of confirm that Superman and Lois aren't going to be around for the long haul. Netflix shocked the world on Saturday afternoon when they announced one of its biggest stars will be leaving one of its biggest shows. Henry Cavill will be leaving The Witcher after the upcoming season 3 and handing the role over to Liam Hemsworth for season 4. This is possibly tied to the recent announcement that Cavill would be starring as Superman in the DCEU, now under the direction of James Gunn. I don't think many people actually saw this one coming, because by all accounts, Henry Cavill loves being the star of The Witcher. He likes playing that character. But apparently, at least it feels like, I don't think the timing can be all that coincidental. He's going to have a heavy workload regarding his future with the DCEU, portraying Superman moving forward. This also kind of contradicts something that Grace Randolph had said recently in social media, that yes, Superman would make a cameo in the Flash movie, but there were no further plans for the character in the DCEU. I think we can put that idea to rest if he's giving up The Witcher on Netflix, which is a pretty huge success, and I imagine it was a pretty damn good payday as well, so he could focus on portraying the Man of Steel Clark Kent on the big screen in the DCEU. Definitely feels like a lot more than a cameo in the Flash movie, if you ask me. Now, as far as having two Superman characters in the DCEU moving forward, I don't know that Warner Brothers Discovery are going to do the MCU model, where what you see on the big screen and what you see on television and streaming is all going to be connected. If I were the DCEU heads like James Gunn, Peter Safran, I wouldn't go on that route. I think a little differentiation and ability to do your own things in the TV shows is probably smart. As we've seen with the MCU, when you set the bar really high with your movie production values, then you try to scale it down to TV, it feels a lot less interesting and a lot less important, even if you have the same actors portraying the characters in the television shows. Even if they are going to have a separate television and movie universe, do they want to have two versions of Superman going on at the exact same time? It seems like they're going to have at least 3 or 4 different versions of Batman, like in movies, so why not do it with Superman? But I think everyone is assuming at this point Henry Cavill is in with the DCEU portraying Clark Kent Superman for the long haul moving forward. I do have one last thing I want to cover regarding DC properties and television, not exactly associated with Superman and Lois, but we do have an update on the show that looked like it was probably canceled, but apparently is not. Warner Brothers Discovery hasn't canceled the Green Lantern series in development, but it's going to be a much longer wait. According to The Hollywood Reporter, the HBO Max series in its original form may have been too expensive for notoriously cost-cutting CEO David Zaslav. Showrunner Seth Grahame-Smith completed scripts for 8 episodes, which all now become tax write-offs, and don't expect to see Finn Wittrock or Jeremy Irvine as Guy Gardner and Alan Scott in the immediate future, although sources indicate that Berlanti Productions is eager to work with both actors. Instead, look for the new show to focus on Jon Stewart, who was apparently off the table during the show's original development. While I'm glad that the Green Lantern show is moving forward and they're going to do something with it, I would have been so sad if it actually just got canceled outright, because we haven't had a good live action interpretation of the Green Lantern ever. I do think they might be making a little bit of a mistake here. Jon Stewart typically works very well in a team book or a team setting as the Green Lantern representative on the team. But as a solo hero, like the starring act of a comic book, he's never really taken off. I personally think Hal Jordan is probably off the table, because if we're going to see Green Lantern in the DCEU, it's likely to be Hal Jordan himself. Why not use Kyle Rayner? He's been a successful solo starring character of Green Lantern in the past. He's pretty much an entire generation's Green Lantern to them, obviously after Hal Jordan died in the comic books. I think that probably would have been a better way to go, just as a focal point as the hero in the show. If you're going to use Jon Stewart, they really should have Guy Gardner with him. Those two characters play off each other really well, with Jon Stewart being the kind of the straight guy and Guy Gardner obviously being a meathead. And I think those two characters always work together really well. But Jon Stewart on his own, don't know that it's a great choice, but we shall see what happens. Perhaps they can make some magic and possibly elevate the character of Jon Stewart. I would like to see that happen because I do like the character a lot. But as far as Superman and Lois, if you're a fan of the show, it does not look good for the future of the show. Everything is conspiring against it. We've got the new CEO of Warner Brothers Discovery, David Zaslav, cutting costs everywhere, no longer invested in the CW, which was acquired by Nexstar, which is also looking to cut costs. We've had the cancellation of every other Arrowverse show announced by the CW at this point. We also have Henry Cavill returning as Clark Kent to the DCEU in the not too distant future. So I hate to see it go. I personally love Superman and Lois, Recently, I talked to my good friend Josh, who actually worked in Hollywood. He was a writer out there. He's a huge DC fan, and we had a great conversation about why Superman and Lois was the best live-action portrayal we've had of the character in nearly 4 decades. If you haven't seen this, definitely check this out and have some love for Superman and Lois, because we might not see it very long. If you don't see it here, there's also a link in the video description.